Hey, what's good, folks? I'm Lil Guillotine, and you're tuned in to another edition of The Chopping Block.
Guillotine and your neck meets beautifully.
The Chopping Block.
Unfortunately, we're gathered here together for a solemn occasion because the racist killer cops in the United States, and specifically Minneapolis, have killed yet another unarmed black man. That's right, the racist killer cop in Minneapolis killed George Floyd by putting his knee on his neck for a prolonged period of time and asphyxiating him, even though George Floyd pleaded multiple times that he could not breathe, in a situation that too eerily resembles the death of Eric Garner by NYPD, and also has hints of notes of Freddie Gray, whose spine was severed by Baltimore police. Why is it that so many black people get killed by police in the United States? Well, the police's role here is to enforce racial hierarchies. Their history begins with slave patrols having been invented for precisely that reason, and still to this day being here to enforce the same type of racial hierarchies that existed during the times of slavery. We have an especially violent society here in the United States. Cops here in the US are world leaders in the amount of murders they commit on citizens every year. They're number 5 in the world. And you will find, if you look at the data, that they consistently kill black people at disproportionate rates. In fact, young black males are 2.5 times more likely than white youth and men to be killed in interactions with the police. And also, being killed by a cop is the 6th leading cause for death for young black men in the United States. George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, which is one of the twin cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and all too recently we witnessed Philando Castile being murdered by a white cop in the Twin Cities. And the cops also killed a white woman in the Twin Cities. The alarming but completely expected contradiction that was exposed when examining those 2 murders by police is that the cop who killed the white woman was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison, but the cop who killed the black man, Philando Castile, was never charged. And you will continue to see many police murders in the United States. The police represent the monopoly on violence that the white supremacist patriarchal capitalist system needs to maintain in order to ensure the status quo. And that violence that the police hold a monopoly on, and every maneuver that police make, is steeped in and shaped by their violent nature. And I'd like to also add that there is no proof that policing in the United States actually does anything to reduce crimes or prevent violence in society, and in fact there's evidence to the contrary, that they produce more violence and crime in society, certainly when they escalate situations unnecessarily, and beyond that as well, because of the role that they play in the racist criminal injustice system. And if you're unfortunate enough to have seen the footage of George Floyd being murdered by that cop, you'll notice that the police does not even acknowledge George Floyd as being a human, because of the fact that whiteness cannot afford to see blackness as existing legitimately in civil society. And in addition, we know from studies that part of the way that anti-black racism manifests itself is that white people have these prejudiced notions that black men actually have superpowers. That's been shown to be a common thought amongst white people in the United States. And also, white people have a prejudiced preconceived notion that black men are invincible and do not feel pain as much as white men. That's part of the reason why the officer did not respond to George Floyd's pleas of "I can't breathe." As long as civil society remains intact with its nature of being parasitic on blackness, and as long as the cops maintain their monopoly on what is seen as a legitimate and legal use of violence, the police will stay murdering black folks. Reforms will not change it. Knowing that and having seen the footage, it makes you wonder, at what point is it ethical for citizens to start shooting officers when they see them murdering innocent, unarmed black people as a form of community self-defense? And you may have heard that 4 police officers were fired after the incident, but it will not calm the rising tide, because we have seen before in the case of Eric Garner's murderer that simply firing somebody, which the NYPD officer was fired 5 years after Eric Garner's murder, does not necessarily mean that that officer will be charged with any crime, as was the case with Eric Garner's murderer. And even though those police were fired, the police union or fraternal order of police may very well win those officers their jobs back. For you see, the police union is not a working class union, but rather a despicable, disgusting, violent institution. For you see, unions, which fight for workers' autonomy in the workplace, generally are a good thing for most of the working class. The police are not working class, but rather they are operatives of the capitalist class. And when we talk about autonomy in the workplace, for police, the police's workplace is violence. And so the police union plays a major role in enabling police to commit more and more violence. And historically, you will see that the police unions play a major factor in enabling police in the United States to murder so many people without repercussions. Police unions are evil and should be banned. And so, when police unions won the rights to negotiate with governments, it was a very dangerous moment indeed. Not a win for the working class, but rather a win against the working class and their safety and health. And now let's turn our attention to the popular uprising that resulted in Minneapolis. If you're not familiar with the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, "Riots are the language of the unheard," I think that's very applicable in this case. In addition to riots being the language of the unheard, I would also point out that in this country, riots have a very successful history at sparking lasting and impactful social change in society. For many meaningful reforms immediately followed popular uprisings in this country, although those uprisings are commonly glossed over and ignored on purpose. And you may have seen the footage of folks during the uprising breaking windows on cop cars, which are paid for by taxpayer money and owned by the city government. And the police's response are that they commit violence by launching smoke grenades and rubber bullets and sponge bullets at the people, destroying the property. The police's value of property over human life is indicative of the morals and ethics of the ruling class in a capitalist society. For without the police's violent defense of private property and their violent maintaining of the racist status quo over human life, the ruling class would not be able to acquire so much wealth and power and maintain an iron grip on them. So a big shout out to the folks who are in the streets challenging the police, working towards a better society. And because of the successful history of riots and uprising in the United States and the uselessness of police reforms, the people should seize this historic opportunity to fight back against the capitalist system and their violent enforcers, and to win some real changes in policing and how the capitalist system operates, which is particularly relevant in this time of pandemic when the capitalist ruling class would rather have us go to work so that they can make profits off of our back and risk dying than they would to provide a social safety net so that we could safely continue the quarantine without giving up our livelihoods. So solidarity to the folks in Minneapolis standing up against police violence, and justice for George Floyd. If you agree, comment below. If you disagree, comment below. If you have any questions, please put a comment below. Alright, peace out, y'all. Catch you on the flip side.